Hello, world. It's Prince the Culture Keeper here. I have the esteemed honor to be with our Goldwater Impact inaugural Goldwater Impact Fellow, Charles Morrison. And Charles, we're going to be talking about Blake Plateau today. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We'll be talking about the coastal treasure, Blake Plateau. Is also dealing with the work that I'm doing now with the Healthy Ocean Coalition, and then just being a part of my advocacy and my um public comment on the protection of Blake Plateau and his cultural ties to the Afro and Indigenous communities along the coastline.
Excellent, excellent. I'm ready to get started. Now, I
All
hear
right.
you got some questions for me.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. More like an interview with each other, stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, so my main question is with you speaking about Capitol Hill on Blaze Plateau history, and then also with the Gullah Geechee corridor, I want to ask you, can you elaborate on the historical significance of the Blaze Plateau for Afro and Indigenous communities along the coastline?
Yeah, sure, Charles. Before I give the Afro and Indigenous cultural significance, I just first want to level set with folks, if you don't mind, right, about what Blake Plateau is, okay? And we'll provide maps for folks either in comments or on video. But the Blake Plateau is actually home to the world's largest deep sea coral habitat. There are different like neighborhoods of them down the coastline. Okay. Actually, Blake's Plateau runs from the edge of like the north all the way down. But really it's like major neighborhoods lie off the coast of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. This just so happens to be the Gullah Geechee Nations region, right? From Jacksonville, North Carolina to just south of Jacksonville, Florida. So in that area, right, we have a vibrant Gullah Geechee history, and we know that the Gullah Geechee are Afro-Indigenous people, right? So I do want to share some valuable insights about kind of first, like what the ocean would mean to people, to our Gullah Geechee ancestors, to our indigenous ancestors to North America, and really like understanding the Atlantic Ocean, it provided sustenance, transportation, trade, and spiritual connection for indigenous peoples for thousands of years, right? You have, for example, the Gwele people of the modern day coastal Georgia and northeastern Florida region. They incorporated the ocean into their religious practices and myths. Because the ocean provided that consistent food, right? And what supported their agricultural practices. It also was a means of transportation. And when God troubled the waters, right, or the waters became angry, it was really this source of like awesome natural power, right, during hurricanes and other major water events. So the Gwele, like most people, right, engaged in fishing, oyster harvesting, and crabbing along the Atlantic coast. You also have another prominent group, right? From where I am right now, I sit on Timucua land. The Timucua were the peoples native to Northeast Florida and even out west a bit and further south. They're the peoples of in and around the Jacksonville, Florida area. I sit just above the Jacksonville, Florida area, right? So there are some Timucua mounds here. There's the Timucua Preserve of Jacksonville. Very much the Timucua were a huge part of this region. And the ocean was also prominently featured in this island dwelling and seafaring people's creation stories and myths. They used water in their regular religious rituals. The Timucua also utilized the Atlantic Ocean, right, for fishing, particularly mullet, which is a huge fish in the Gullah Geechee diet, as well as sea turtles and shellfish. And
Right,
the Timucua, right, developed sophisticated like fishing techniques. We know about the canoes and all those things. So the water was really important to them. Then we know, right, for the
right,
the Gullah Geechee in particular, who
right,
descend from both enslaved Africans and Timucua and Gwale and other groups, right?
right,
That number one, the water, Queen Quet always says, right? the water bring me and the water going to take me back, right?
Right,
So it is the water that was our means of getting to America, right? Which is
right,
really important. And it is the water that also sustained us, that kept our crops alive. Sounds very familiar to the
right,
indigenous
right,
community. So
right,
really, Blake Plateau is the place where also you think there are people, some of our ancestors, enslaved ancestors, that chose to go back home another way, right?
right,
They the ones that ritualistically offered themselves to the water, as we say, right? Because that was their means of going home to escape what would lie the life ahead of them on
right,
land. And so we also honor the Blake Plateau as an area of reverence, of cemetery, right? Of high spiritual belief, because it is because our ancestors who got us here, that our life here is made possible. And for
right,
those of them who could not, who did not want to stay and who wanted to go back home another way, right? We honor them as well for their decision to be with the ancestors and to watch us from above. So issues like Ebo Landing, right, as Queen Quet has written extensively about in her seminal book. So that is really what Blake's Plateau means to us. And it also is the areas where our fish, our mullets, our oysters really grow. Those are the nascent habitats that when they grow older and move to shore, we catch them, we eat from them, we utilize them,
right,
to bake them, right? So that's really a long drawn out, but the Afro-Indigenous meaning of Blake Plateau.
right. So in itself, I want to say thank you for giving the story, them that also telling about the spiritual beliefs and the importance of Blake Plateau and the ocean towards our coastal communities. So with this, as young entrepreneurs and with self startups and nonprofits, how can initiatives like yours, Goldwater Ventures and Healthy Ocean Coalition help preserve and promote the cultural heritage associated with the Blake Plateau?
You know, your first question, Charles, is the clue. We got to start with the people who've been here.
Right,
That is where we need to start, right?
right,
It is the inhabitants of the Low Country, the inhabitants of Amelia Island, and the Sea Islands that know when things don't look the way they always looked, right? Or when our parents, our grandparents noticed that sea level rise, or the size of fish has diminished, right? Like it really is from the people who live here, us and our ancestors and our
right,
elders, right? We carry that knowledge of knowing like what seems right and normal and what doesn't seem normal, right? And
right,
it is we scientists and like the larger conservation communities have to look to us first. Gone are the days where people conserve things out of my window and things out of my property and just walk over and ignore me, right? I am a part of this environment. We don't see
right,
ourselves as different from our environment. We are a part of our environment. We steward
right,
our. So groups like Goldwater Ventures and Healthy Oceans Coalition, right, need to, as we are, right, begin with the Afro-Indigenous people that have been here. And
right,
we, in partnership with them, right, we can then begin to observe changes and address changes.
right,
And really conservation needs to start with the people, right? The people that have
right.
really been serving it all along. So that's definitely the way we can start, is by being in coalition and community with our Afro-Indigenous, right, partners, us, right?
Perfect. So my, my last question is, how do you envision the future of cultural sustainability efforts concerning the Blake Plateau and the surrounding areas?
It must be federally protected, right? So you
Right,
have something called the National Antiquities Act, right? Which is the act that we now know extends to kind of undersea conservation efforts.
right,
Interesting, the term antiquities. These are cultural resources, not just natural resources, not just
right,
environmental resources, not just subsistence resources, right? These
right,
are also cultural resources. And really, it's the name of the law and that framework that I really think we can share and posit, and for the first time, not just get this area protected and passed, right?
Right.
As being federally protected, but bring into people's consciousness the idea that these sites are not just ecological sites. They're
Right.
not just environmental sites, right? They're not just climate change sites of danger or concern. These are
Right.
cultural heritage sites, right? And
Right.
what cultural group does this heritage right kind of belong to, or what
Right.
group stewards over this cultural heritage
Right.
before any of our trucks and beach homes and docks and yachts got here, right? And those are
Right.
the people that we need to be working with. Yeah.
Right. That's amazing. I want to say thank you. Thank you. Is there is there anything that you want to ask me as far as with this conversation?
Charles, I got a lot I want to ask you.
I
But
got
tell us more about your efforts, right? I first of all,
you.
I
Right.
lift up and say the Culture Keeper Circle, right? That this interview is appearing on, this conversation is appearing on.
Right.
Is really our show where we're interviewing culture keepers, right?
Right.
Oftentimes we think of culture keepers as our elders, right? And then
Right.
ultimately our ancestors, but also we are the culture keepers as well. There is an
Right.
intergenerational and multi-generational simultaneous effort to keep culture. So Charles, you are arising as one of those like culture keeper young
Right.
stars. And
Right.
I want to know from you, what work are you doing to protect Blake Plateau?
Yes, sir. So overall, what I'm doing, so when I had the ability and the chance to go into the Healthy Ocean Coalition advocacy training, it was the most magnificent thing that I've learned and I connected with. Um, uh, it was in Savannah, Georgia. It was a 3 day immersive training. We learned from policy to advocacy to just being one with each other, connecting with people from Atlanta, from other parts of Georgia, them that, as well as people that own nonprofits and other entrepreneurs. Overall, I had the ability to take what I learned and them to also doing field analysis on Blaze Plateau, them to also with other coastal communities, and then that with my research now on focusing on protecting these areas and conservation, where I was able to kind of steer my way on the work that I'm doing. I'm focusing on creating an op-ed and an academic article right now with Goldwater Ventures and Healthy Ocean Coalition members. And just being able just to bring and collaborate other like-minded people and them to be able to produce something to spread that word up inside the Blessed Plateau.
Perfect, Charles. And tell us more about your written work. What kind of writing are you doing, and what research and documentation are you looking in?
Yes, sir. So, as far as the research and documentation I'm looking into how Blaze Plateau and the history of Blaze Plateau affects the coastal communities as well, and then that why how basically the importance of Blaze Plateau to the cultural beliefs, the family, lifestyles, folkways, and then the also food ways of these communities being able to be protected and why it should be listed as a marine protected area. Now, when we look into it, in the writing that I've been researching and that I've been doing, we come across preservation versus development. Now, the thing of it is that preservation in itself, being able that I'm aiming on writing on, is that preservation in itself helps protect not only the cultural sustainability, but also it can add in alternative economic ways rather than extracting resources and extracting um, things that the community needs.
That's right. And I just want to dive into some floating terms that you used, Charles, because that work sounds incredible, right? And I have a front row seat to the work that you're doing, and I'm very proud of it. Um, Preservation, conservation,
Right,
sustainability, right? These are floating terms
right,
that happen and co-occur, right? And co-appear. And I
right,
just say, conservation typically focuses on the environment.
right,
preservation is for historical sites.
Right.
It's for objects. You preserve objects,
Right.
sustain people. Okay. So we're not museumizing living people, right? We
Right.
really are seeking to help sustain the life ways of Gullah people and
Right.
other indigenous people along the coast, as
Right.
well as really lift up their stories and their connection to the Blake Plateau, this
Right.
underwater sanctuary, right? As a principal justification for why to protect it, along with the ecological, the conservationist, right, and other rationales. So I'm very excited for your work. I've got
Thank
another quick question for you.
you.
I opened up talking about younger generations. Now,
Right.
people say you younger generation. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, because I'm kind of tired, Charles. I ain't gonna hold. But I do want to know from you, how are you and others, right, in the space engaging younger generations in like understanding Blake Plateau, right, helping
Right.
protect, because we didn't grow up using the words Blake
Right.
Plateau, right? Like
Right.
that's
Right.
not like, I don't want people to think, oh, we worship Blake Plateau. Like, no,
Right.
okay? It's like, no, that's not how it
Right.
goes. In fact, Blake Plateau has always been there, and us as
Right.
stewards of our environment have
Right.
always shepherded the Blake Plateau before we even knew its name, right?
Right.
Because what we do along our coast as indigenous people, we care
Right.
about our environment. That's default for us, right? So I want to know from you, younger generations, right, that are now hearing the terms Blake Plateau, that their parents or their grandparents or their great grandparents never
Right.
heard before. How are we getting them involved? Or how are you getting them involved in the efforts to help save Blake Plateau?
Right. Okay, perfect. So on my last point, four terms that I use for far as with the younger generation and that how I will help the younger generation know the worth of Blake Plateau is educate, art, collaborate, and advocate. So overall, what I'm doing as far as my action is, of course, is the research on the paper, but also I am focusing on bringing some speakers that work for NOAA or that focus on cultural sustainability into a Clemson University setting. You know, having a roundtable, being able to talk with us emerging planners, first and second year, being able to know what we need to do as far as being planners, because again, being an urban planner in itself is a huge term. When it comes to leading into environmental planning, it's a huge term. You don't know if you're going to focus on conservation, you know if you're going to focus on social justice, or the community development aspect. But being able just to spread awareness and then that being able to educate, like you said, them between conservation, sustainability, and preservation, in some terms, as we speak as humans, it kind of overlaps. But being able to spread awareness and even on this roundtable, just having a conversation, the conversation and spreading stories orally, is it's a form of indigenous um, path of passing on knowledge.
Absolutely.
So in that way, we are able to collaborate,
Right.
advocate, and educate. Then after that, that leads into get into the art industry as well. A lot of artists are being able to make art, especially on indigenous art as well, over Blake Plateau, telling stories.
Right.
So in this way, if we, well, as well as myself, I'm going whenever I go to Savannah, Georgia, or even St. Helena. I go near these areas and I go to the people, and then I learn from the people. Them that I take what I've learned back to my classmates and back to my peers.
Excellent. And Charles, I just want to lift up, you talked about two subfields of
Uh,
planning. You've got urban planning and
uh,
environmental planning. And I know we've had the pleasure of working on kind of both sorts of projects together. And really, I want to remark the way you, right, are blending them together. Because for people like us that live along the coast, there's bits of both, right? We have rural
Right,
areas that are urbanizing, so urban
right,
planning. is a part of that.
Right,
But also let's not overbuild. Let's not
right,
overdo it, right? And acidify our oceans or like ruin our environments or natural ecosystems that are built there to protect us, right? From
right,
flood, water surge, and all kinds of other things.
right,
But then you talk about environmental planning, right? How do you plan environments, right? Even
right,
in urban spaces or around other spaces, and being intentional, excuse me, about planning environmental spaces, respecting ecological systems, I think is awesome. And you know
thank
what it does for me is it says that when you're working in this area, when you're working with other rural areas with Afro, Indigenous, Latinx descended, right, including Native American, Pacific Islander groups, when you're working in these naturalist settings where urbanness and suburbanness and right ecosystems are all kind of coexisting, planning around that, and when you're in those places you got to use them all. You can't just come with one heavy hammer of urban planning and ruin other things, right, that are keeping things
you.
together. So I know that was drawn out, but I just wanted to like draw that picture as I heard you say it. And I really just heard the way that you were blending the two, and I think that's awesome. And I think that the new paradigm, right, for how we approach creating placemaking, right? How we do communal
Right,
placemaking in areas that are rural and ancestral and have significance and meaning for the environment. So,
right.
Charles, any last words? Anything you want to share with the people? Where can we read your stuff? Where can we find your stuff?
Yes, sir. LinkedIn, Charles Morrison, and then I will be posting the article through Goldwater Ventures and also the Healthy Ocean Coalition. Um, and yeah,
Excellent. Everybody, world, thank you for joining us for Prince the Culture Keeper with Charles. Charles is a mainstay. He's
hey,
our Goldwater Impact Fellow, our inaugural, the first one. So you're gonna see him again.
hey,
And Charles, thank you for letting me pepper you with questions because I wasn't just about to have you just interview.
I appreciate it.
Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you. Take care.